The Galapagos Islands are home to a variety of wildlife. One of these distinct animals is the Galapagos tortoise. This tortoise is best known for its unique shell shape and lifespan of over 100 years. Some other species that live on the Galapagos are Darwin's finches, which, upon adaptive radiation, have gained varied features in their anatomical structure. The marine iguanas that are native to the Galapagos are the only marine lizard species in the world. With such unique wildlife, the Galapagos Islands are a place of immense biodiversity. Efforts to preserve such beauty are the only way to make sure that they don't turn into distant memories. Beginning in the age of exploration, European travelers journeyed abroad and soon discovered the Galapagos. Of them, Charles Darwin played his part by formulating his theory of evolution through careful observation of life on the islands. Before Darwin's time, foreign goats, first introduced around the 16th to 17th centuries by Spanish and Portuguese sailors, and later on by whalers, soon made a home for themselves on Galapagos Islands. This was not by accident. Goats were left to ensure a reliable food source that could be easily accessed on overseas voyages from Europe. The goat population was small in the beginning, so they posed no real threat to the Galapagos Islands. In the 20th century, these goats were able to cross the Peri Isthmus, and their population rapidly exploded. Perhaps, like Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest, they were too fit for the Galapagos. Thus, a huge problem emerged that had the ability to undermine the local ecosystem and destroy the entire flora and fauna of the Galapagos. In the 1990s, a formal meeting was called by the Charles Darwin Foundation, later renamed the Galapagos Conservancy. The group consisted of environmentalists, biologists, and conservationists committed to the preservation of the Galapagos Islands ecosystems and lush biodiversity. A concern had been raised regarding the Galapagos tortoise, whose population had declined significantly and was deemed an endangered species. The origin of the problem was found to be the 250,000 goats that had been residing on the islands for centuries, but an increase in population occurred only recently. These feral goats were catastrophic to the ecosystem as they stopped regeneration of vegetation completely through overgrazing. Later, it was discovered that one species of plant had in fact gone extinct on the Santiago Island. Conservation efforts were too long and too late to save the species in time. The Galapagos tortoise would become an extinct species as well if no action was taken to find a solution quickly. Initially, the Foundation struggled with obtaining enough funds for their ideal method of eradication: helicopters. They were forced to turn to ground troops and animals to fulfill their goal. However, sufficient funding was finally achieved in 2000 when the Global Environment Facility, a partnership between countries that dedicate their efforts into combating environmental problems, provided them with more than $13 million to eradicate all invasive species on the islands. This would prove to be a massive turning point in their conservation plans later, as eradication was made more efficient and the Galapagos tortoise's population decline was slowed down as a result. Project Isabella was initiated in 1997 and ended in 2006. Its purpose? Eliminate any and all introduced mammals from the Pinta, Santiago, and Isabella Islands. The start of the operation began on the smallest of the islands, Pinta. Hunters used rifles to gun down the invasive goats, costing the project $85,000 and putting the cost per goat at around $1,300. 2 years later, Pinta was declared goat-free. The hunters and goats on the island also served another purpose. Pinta had been a training ground for refining the methods and practices that would later be used on a larger scale on the other islands, increasing efficiency and keeping costs down per goat as much as possible. And in 2001, eradication of goats on Santiago Island had begun. Teams of hunters were deployed on the island. They received substantial aid from dogs imported from New Zealand, specially trained for catching goats. They tracked goats by scent, alerted through barking when they caught one, and contained them until hunters arrived. Ground hunters successfully eliminated more than 70,000 goats in total by themselves and their loyal companions. Helicopters would become the main driving force in this operation from now on, commanded by experienced pilots from New Zealand. In 2004, Judas Goats were put into effect since it proved difficult and inefficient to rely on ground troops and dogs to find large packs of goats. These goats were released and had radio collars attached to them with a GPS function that led hunters to groups of goats. They were used in conjunction with helicopters, which had stationed 4 gunners with 2 on each side, using fully automatic rifles. Once a Judas goat had led them to a sizable pack of goats, gunners would open fire, leaving only the Judas goat left behind. Another type of goat used in the operation were the Mata Hari goats, named after a World War I agent who would extract information through allurement that were injected with pheromones to attract male goats. These types of goats proved to be the most effective and were used over Judas goats for the remainder of the project. All things considered, the operation proved to be a massive success in saving the Galapagos tortoise population. Although some endemic species were lost in the process, such as the Pinta tortoise, and others came very close to extinction, including Darwin's finches, the process of repopulation and recovery could begin. The total cost of the operation came in at just under $8.5 million. On Santiago and Isabella, $5.5 million and $3 million were used for eradication purposes, putting the cost per goat at $60 on Santiago and $48 on Isabella. Compared to Pinta, the efficiency of the operation improved by nearly 30 times, and the efficacy rate was tantamount to that number. However, in the face of the ecosystem's recovery, the eradication of goats from the islands has posed a problem for some of the island's inhabitants. In a New York Times interview, Eladio Penafiel stated that they're killing these goats from helicopters and leaving them to die out there when I'm trying to feed my children. It's as if they want to exterminate us too. The 20,000 or so people living on the island had lost a precious source of food. By 2006, the Galapagos Conservancy declared that the main islands were finally free of all introduced mammals that pose a threat to the native species. Other conservation and eradication efforts in the next decade continue with invasive plants. Blackberry plants limit the growth of other plant species and even stop it entirely. Moreover, the tortoises that consume guavas are unknowingly dispersing seeds of an invasive species, which takes away needed space for the reproduction of native plants. A steady recovery of the flora and fauna of the Galapagos continues in 2020 and beyond. So, were the conservation efforts worth all of this time and money? The project leaders thought so, as they responded with a resounding yes. Wait a minute, the goat's the imposter? Although some endemic species were lost in the process, such as the painted tortoise, those came very close to extinction. Oh my god. Eladio Penafiel stated that they're killing these goats from helicopters and leaving them to die out here while I'm trying to feed my children, as if they want to exterminate us too.